Hi everyone, welcome back for another tutorial going through today the wonderful story that is layoffs and short-time working. I want to make this video and this tutorial as quick as I possibly can and get to really the juicy bits of detail that you really need to know. So the bits we're going to look through here, we're going to cover are what are the eligibility criteria for your staff if you are looking to apply layoff or short-time working. What the blooming heck is a layoff and short-time working? Until recently, no one really had heard of this. Obviously, we have, but not in the wider circles had that taken place. Also, what are my staff entitled to? So if you lay somebody off, what will they be entitled to receive? We'll then look at what is statutory guaranteed pay during these periods of time. Can I place my staff onto a layoff despite the coronavirus job retention scheme? What are the pitfalls of a layoff and short-time working for you and also your staff? And can staff on layoff or short-time working complete other work at the same time whilst being laid off? And also we're going to cover the essential bits that is through all of this, and even in this during crisis, employment law, as we keep saying, doesn't change, it doesn't move, it doesn't alter, it's still there, it still applies. So what are some of the key eligibility criteria right now if you're looking to apply layoffs or short-time working? So one of the key ones is obviously it's essential that these people are qualified and classified as employees of your business. So we're not talking about contractors here. We are talking about employees. These are employee rights to be laid off. This also wouldn't necessarily apply to those who are on 0-hour contracts. We are not talking about workers, we are talking about employees. Equally, we're also looking to see if it's something that's an agreement that's been reached between sometimes, depending on where you work, you may have a trade union or some workplace representative, get the words out, including maybe even an employee representative that your staff have voted to have, that you would need to make these local agreements with. So you may need to negotiate that with those in the same way as BA have recently done as well. The employer and the employee, in some cases, you know, without that middle slice in there, in some cases, the employer and the employee will have to agree to alter some of the terms and conditions of the employment that's already in existence to enable this to actually take place. And we'll come on to that in a minute. So, what is a layoff and short-time working? Well, quite quickly, I mean, layoffs and short-time working typically and historically would be used in a period where obviously you can't open up for a period of time, there isn't work there, or there's a reduction of work for a period of time, and therefore you apply some layoff or short-time working if you have the capacity to do so. So a common example of this would have been if something quite severe had happened, if you owned a restaurant and the restaurant got flooded, or you had a gas leak or something on those sort of lines, and you had to close your restaurant for a period of time, what you might do is look to apply layoffs and short-time working to your staff whilst you obviously correct the issue at the restaurant, so you can then reopen and have your staff there and able to work for you. But equally recognizing whilst the restaurant is closed, you'd have reduced revenues coming in, and therefore it gives you that ability to be able to obviously flex your staff costs at that time. Because obviously, as we all know already now, if people are going through this process, then obviously it very much does reduce on their pay that they're going to get at the end of this. So obviously the key difference here then between a layoff and short time is a layoff is when you are sending people physically to go home. They will not be able to come in, they will not be completing other work unless there is other suitable forms of work that you could give them. But they are definitely not there. That's the whole point of the layoff. And we'll come on to other parts around the pay while somebody's laid off in a minute. But if you are looking to put someone on short time working, then quite clearly what you are looking to do is for a temporary period of time, reduce the hours that they're contractually obliged to work. So, for example, if you are contractually asking someone to normally work full-time, 40 hours a week, under this, what you may look to do is instruct them to come in for 20 hours a week rather than 40, and obviously their pay will go down by half in accordance with that as well. So thereby, if you've got reduced work capacity available for a small period of time, And bearing in mind that the key phrase to all of this is around being temporary. This is a temporarily sent home. Temporarily, your hours are reduced. This is not a permanent fixture or a permanent change. That's not what these are designed to do. So whilst these options normally would be used to help, to avoid the compulsory redundancy route, they should always be the last chance saloon. They should be the last resort, because quite clearly what you're going to do is have a significant impact on your staff at that current time. And obviously everything we teach, everything we go through with our businesses and our clients is to put in the center of everything you do, your employees, your staff, not your customers, not your creditors, your staff. Your staff are the center of everything. Without the people in your business, you can't get the revenues in your business. And your people and your revenues are the two core elements to any business, anywhere, any sector. So you need the people. So if you are going to be laying people off or putting them on short-time working, quite clearly it's going to have a huge impact on morale. And like we said, this is a short-term temporary fix. Eventually you're going to have to come back to some normality, which is everything we're talking about right now in the current crisis. You're going to need those people to come back to be able to do that. So you've got to be careful about morale. People have understanding, of course they do, but you've got to use this as probably your last resort. I would emphasize that for sure. And equally, I mean, at this moment in time, the argument will be, why would you lay someone off right now when currently there's the coronavirus job retention scheme that guarantees the government are going to pay 80% of individual salaries up to a maximum of £2,500. The cost impact of that to you as a business is neutral. It's going to cover all of those areas: your employers' national insurance, your employers' pensions contributions up to the minimum level. It's going to cover that. So the cost implication to you is very small. To go for a layoff, which has a maximum impact on your staff and greatly increases the decapitating kind of outcome in terms of financial impacts for staff, it's huge from a layoff, or even on short-time working, it's huge in comparison to applying the coronavirus job retention scheme and furloughing your staff. So bear that in mind as well. This will be very critically looked at by your employees after that point in time. So a critical consideration here. We've been saying this for quite a long time. Feels like we've been in an isolated island screaming contracts, and people walk by us as though we're the crazy person in the street. But evidently what's happening right now is up and down the country, companies who don't typically have written terms and conditions, which they should have by law, statements and particulars with their employees. Many don't. And many that don't are starting to find the pitfalls of not having any written terms and conditions. It means they don't have any terms to actually draw upon, and they're trying to make these decisions with their staff. And I hope and pray that as we come out of this process, those businesses will learn from this, take action, because not only are you legally obliged to provide written statement of particulars to both your employees and your workers. Now we're in April as of recording this, you should be using those to increase your ability to take action with your staff and to do what you need to do, and to give security to you and your business by having those terms and conditions in writing. It's important. And we're finding out actually not having those things in writing is making this process slightly more nuanced and complex for those individual businesses, depending on each individual case. But quite clearly, there's a key question here to be asked, and that is, do you currently have a written contract of employment with your staff, statements of particulars? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, that's fantastic. Do you have a layoff clause? Now, quite a lot of those contracts, I would guess, don't have that clause within their contracts to be able to apply layoff and short-time working. And therefore, if you do have that in there, let's cover that first. If you do so happen to have that clause, that's fantastic for you. You can write. You still need to write to your members of staff to notify them of what your intent is, to lay them off. what the implications of that is going to be upon them, and how long potentially you envisage that to be for, or you're going to review it for. So that's going to be one of the key things you need to put in a letter to them. Now, this work on the proviso that you either have a written contract and you don't have a clause in there that enables you to lay staff off or put them on short-time working, or alternatively, you don't have any written statements of particulars whatsoever. What is the next area you then need to look at? Well, it's the same thing with the furloughed process. You will still need to write to your staff. You will still need to get their consent to place them on a layoff or to place them on short-time working. Well, that's quite an important fact, because if you don't have any written terms and conditions, quite clearly, it's highly unlikely you would have said when somebody started that in your implied contract you'd have with them that, hey, guess what? I will want to be able to lay you off or put you on short-time working if the company needs to do so. Do you agree to that? Yes, I do. Oh, that's fantastic. It's unlikely you would have had that conversation, because so many people up and down the country, until this crisis hit, didn't even know what a layoff or short-time working was. And it's easily contested by the employee that that conversation never even took place. So you need to get their consent. If you do not, then potentially not only are you in breach of your contractual terms with that employee, you're actually also committing unlawful deduction of wages. In order to make deductions from people's wages by reducing their salary, either on layoff or short-time working, you need their consent to do so. So that's a really important factor. The employment law around this, remember, hasn't changed. The crisis may have hit. We may be doing some very different activities compared to what we would have done beforehand, and these may not be your normal kind of times, but the employment law has not changed. It's important to make sure that if you are following this process, you get individuals' consent. Quite clearly, the first argument that's going to come forward from that, from everybody, if you are looking at a layoff or short-time working, as opposed to furloughing someone and claiming the job retention scheme, and you know, why would somebody want to sign that knowing it's more detrimental than going on to the job retention scheme? That's a very difficult avenue to try and get around. I would argue that this is very much based on a case-by-case, business-by-business circumstance and scenario. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all with all of this. Unfortunately, it just doesn't exist. Every business is different. We've dealt with businesses that have made redundancies. We've dealt with businesses that have considered short-time working despite the job retention scheme. We've dealt with businesses that have laid people off and continued with that despite the job retention scheme. We've had people that have furloughed, a lot of people that have furloughed their staff, quite clearly. And we have people that are actually still currently working from home. So we've experienced the whole spectrum of that. I would just say, as I've said to other people so far before, it's harder to get them individuals to sign, to agree to something that's going to be more deferential, more impactful on their lives financially than if they went through another scheme. You must have a good, solid basis for why you are going down that road, because obviously the alternatives are if somebody doesn't sign that particular agreement. That's when you need to start having to have a think about what the next avenues are. And quite clearly, like I said, this is your last resort before compulsory redundancies. So that's kind of the next step. If people are not signing these agreements, i.e. the same thing would apply with furloughing staff. If they're not going to agree to be furloughed, then potentially your only other alternative option is to look at compulsory redundancies or even voluntary redundancies, and we'll cover that in another video shortly. So what are my staff entitled to? What can they get? If I go through this process and I start laying people off, what would they be entitled to? Well, we already know with short-time working, it's going to be their hourly rate, but it's going to be less, or their monthly rate, but less depending on how many hours. So it's prorated out as to what they would get. But with layoff, it's slightly a bit more nuanced. It's different because you're sending people home. Now, if you don't have an agreement to lay somebody off, you don't have that clause, and you still lay somebody off and they haven't consented and you're not looking to do redundancy, then they are fully entitled to have their full pay. Now, we've had this before in a couple of conversations with individuals where they've been laid off They've not been written to, it's not in their contract, and they've not given consent to do so. They should, at that point in time, then be fully entitled to their full pay whilst they've been laid off, because there is nothing to suggest otherwise. And like I said, if that employer then chose to pay a reduced payment, like what we're going to go through here in a minute on the statutory guaranteed pay, then that's an unlawful reduction of wages, and that would be a breach of contract. So it's something we need to be careful of. Now, the statutory guaranteed pay, that's the government's statutory, it's the minimum. That's the minimum payment that a staff member should be eligible to receive if they are laid off by you as the employer. So in order to be able to qualify for this, again, they have to be an employee. This is not a thing for contractors or workers, it's for employees' rights. They must have been employed for at least a minimum of 1 month. They must be able to make themselves reasonably available. I know in these times it might be quite difficult to do this, but they must make themselves reasonably available for work if the situation changes at short notice. And they mustn't refuse any other suitable, reasonable alternatives of other forms of employment as opposed to being laid off. So they must make themselves available to do work if required. Now, the statutory guaranteed pay. Now, this obviously we did the slides in March. We've now gone past the 6th of April as of making the video. Apologies on that. However, we have already got the amounts in there as to what had changed over into the new financial year. So as you can see, if you are going to be laying somebody off, they are entitled to £30 a day now, as opposed to the 29. It's gone up by £1, a whole pound, yes. But it's gone up to £30 from the 6th of April, but the same parameters still apply. It's £30 a day for a maximum of 5 days in any 3-month period. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful. So what does that actually mean in reality? It means that for a 3-month period, an employee is entitled to £150. That's not a lot of money. That's why there's such a big disparity between laying somebody off at the moment and furloughing somebody through the job retention scheme, where they get 80% of their salary. Okay, and don't forget, that's on full time. So that figure of your £30 a day and your £150 over a 3-month period, that's prorated out for part-time staff. So it gets even worse if you're not even doing full-time work. Now, do staff still accrue holidays throughout this period of time? Well, yes, in short, they do. Your contract hasn't ended, nothing has ceased, the relationship hasn't expired, they're still an employee, so all of those other bits and pieces like the annual leave will continue to accrue. So for as long as they are with you, they will continue to accrue their statutory entitlement whilst they are laid off or are on short-time working. And obviously, layoff versus the job retention scheme. We've already covered this in quite a key area, because obviously those that are laid off are going to be heavily, and you can see from those figures on the guaranteed pay, heavily disadvantaged as opposed to being placed on the job retention scheme. Now, I'm not entirely sure, the circumstances, like I said, in each individual business, they can be entirely different. And in some circumstances, it may be that actually doing the layoff at the moment in time will be more preferential. Let's just give an example. The job retention scheme, in order for a business to be able to qualify to reclaim the 80% back from the government, you have to furlough staff for a minimum of 3 weeks. If you are in a business where you have no ability to do it for a whole period of 3 weeks because you're still slightly open and you need to rotate people, then in which case that may not be an option for you. And therefore, whilst you are rotating staff, when they're not in work, you may need to put them on short-time working or lay them off for those periods of time. And that's just an example of when you might choose that option over and above the job retention scheme. But like I said, it's something to be thought of very, very carefully, because it's most likely in most contracts, you're probably going to need to get your staff to sign up and agree to that parameter. So the pitfalls, we've already looked through some of these. Sorry, I've drunk a drink and it's gone down the wrong way. But what are the pitfalls? Staff. Well, staff, clearly, they get significantly reduced salary during this period of time, and it could potentially result in redundancy. For someone who's been laid off for 4 to 6 weeks continuously, they can actually potentially say, I believe actually now I'm redundant. I'm not an employee. I believe that I am redundant. And they may then try and claim for redundancy pay or notice pay as well that they might be due under their contractual terms and conditions. That's a reality for businesses to consider. Now, obviously, your business also, whilst having that impact, like we just said there, that staff can claim redundancy after the 4 weeks, that has a financial implication on your business right now. We also mentioned the impact on morale, and I find that as one of the biggest things because, you know, after winter comes the spring. So at the moment in time, we are where we are right now, and it's dark, but eventually you will reopen. That's the hope, right? Well, you will need staff to be able to do that. So if you're impacting your staff morale right now, you will still have that impact when you come to open. And can laid off staff complete other work? Now, this is where it comes into the furloughment as well with some staff. So they can complete other work with other employers if it's agreed with you and it's not for a competitor. Now, obviously, the key facts here are that employee is still contractually obliged towards you as the employer. So if you require them to come back to work, regardless of whatever agreements they have elsewhere, it's fully right in your entitlements to expect them to be able to come back as soon as that period of layoff or short-time working ends. And the fair selection and discrimination process. So quite clearly right now, what's happening is you may be in a process where, let's use another example. You may be in a process where you have a warehouse and the warehouse actually is not open right now. So you furlough that group of staff that are in the warehouse. You may be in a position where currently you have your back office staff, and some of them are more required than others because of obviously the parameters of the job and the nature of the roles that they're doing. You may require them to be in, but maybe not for the amount of hours that you're currently got them on, but you can't furlough them because you still need them. And you've got another group of staff that are a lot more senior than that are actually making key business decisions and responsibilities that you can't put on layoff, you can't short-time work, you can't furlough. So you might have a group of people that fall in one business into 3 different categories. And what you need to make sure is that there's a fair business reason, as we just went through there, fair business sense as to why you're selecting this group of staff to get 80% of their salary. This other group of staff are getting 50% of their salary because they're actually doing short-time working, half their hours. And you've got this other group of staff that's getting 100% of their salary. And you need to have a fair business reason as to why you are doing that. Again, employment law doesn't cease during this period of time. So if you are making decisions that are going to impact on people's pay and they're being unfairly chosen, so in other words, I like that guy, I get along with him. If we're going to be going through this, I would quite like him to be working in my kitchen with me whilst we're doing takeaways, as opposed to that woman over there who I don't really like at the moment in time. They do exactly the same job, but I'm going to put them off on furlough on 80% pay whilst this guy gets 100%. Potentially, you've got a discriminatory reason as to why you've chosen. You need to have a fair selection process as to why you are applying this. And like we said in that example, they're using the business need as to those different functions, and the way that it's working would be potentially a justifiable reason as to why you are looking to do that. And again, as always, with all of our tutorials at the moment in time, I want to take the last minutes, please, if you're still with us, to go through the keys to planning through this crisis that everybody's going through. Like we said, it's quite clear that the people aspect to your business is key to not only right now, but also when you come out of right now into the future as to how you operate your business and come out of this crisis and then try and gain more traction to get back to normality. 2 key elements to every business: people, revenues. Without the people, you don't get the revenues, and you need both to have a successful business. So you should be putting at the very center of every business your staff, the people in your business. Even if that's you as a self-employed, one-off, one-man band, you should be putting yourself first and foremost. So having a plan, having a contingency as to how you operate this. So for example, you know, with the government scheme at the moment, it runs up until the end of May, sorry. So if you are remaining furloughed until the end of May, and you're not quite yet ready with the amount of work that's coming in to just naturally bring everybody back to full time as of the 1st of June, you may want to actually apply some short-time working. So it's how do I do that? What are my next steps? How do I consider that? When do I do it? How do I make my plan? Where do I think I'm going to be by which point in time? And having those answers is really, really key. And right now, as I say, we are doing this for literally £100 plus VAT. It's covering costs in time to do it, nothing else. There's a huge saving on this compared to what we would normally offer it for, and it's to try and help as many businesses as we can. We can't do it for free because we need to obviously cover those costs ourselves as a business, but also we can't do it for free because if you do spend money on it, you remain committed to the plan that you're putting in place. This isn't something that should be filed away or put in the bin after you've got it done and not considered. It's something you should be monitoring and be referring to on a weekly basis as you're going through this particular crisis. Now, guys, I just want to thank you very much for this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're all staying home. I hope you're all staying safe, saving lives, and obviously staying safe. All fundamentally and key aspects right now. And I hope you remain positive during this period of time. And obviously, if you like this, if you found any of the content that we've put forward in any of our tutorials helpful in any way, shape, or form, please, please, please like, subscribe, and share this content with other people that you are associated with or your contacts, because we want to be able to give as much help as we possibly can. This is all 100% free information that currently businesses have been scrambling around and getting this information from all sorts of different places. All of our information is based on all of our experience, knowledge through HR professional expertise that we hold, but also based on the government's their own guidance that they're publishing on a regular basis. So we will not publish any information, any details out here onto our tutorials that isn't contained within the government guidance. So have a good time, take care, guys, and stay safe.